This happened to me about 4 years ago when I was 21. At the time, I lived in Pennsylvania, and I had a habit of visiting one of my friends who lived a few hours away in a different town. I'd drive out there on weekends, hang out, then head back home the same night so I wouldn't have to sleep on his couch. It was during one of those trips that something happened to me that I'll never forget. And to this day, it's made me much more cautious about stopping anywhere late at night. I was driving back home after spending the day at his place. It was already late by the time I got on the road, probably around 11 p.m. The drive was supposed to take a little over 2 hours. Normally, I don't like driving that late, but I was used to the route and figured I'd be fine. About halfway into the drive, I realized I was running low on gas. My car wasn't on empty yet, but the needle was close enough that I knew I'd need to stop before I got back home. I don't know if you've ever driven through rural Pennsylvania at night, but it gets dark. I mean really dark. Whole stretches of road with no streetlights, just trees and nothing else. So when I finally saw a gas station sign glowing in the distance, I felt relieved. It was one of those small, off-the-highway stations. The kind that stays open 24 hours, but usually looks like a ghost town at night. When I pulled into the lot, I noticed right away how empty it was. There were only 2 cars there, one parked near the air pump on the side, and the other by the convenience store entrance. The lights above the pumps cast this dim, yellow glow that made everything feel a little eerie. I pulled up to one of the pumps, got out, and started fueling up. At first, everything seemed fine. But then I noticed someone standing near the corner of the building by one of those big ice machines. He was leaning against the wall, smoking a cigarette. At first, I didn't pay much attention. But then I realized something. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't staring into space. He was staring directly at me. It wasn't just a quick glance either. His eyes were locked on me, completely still. I tried to play it off like I hadn't noticed, but I could feel it. Every few seconds, I'd glance back, and sure enough, his gaze hadn't moved, just fixed right on me. It made me uncomfortable, but I tried to ignore it. Maybe he was just some random guy waiting for someone inside. I told myself not to overthink it. When my tank was finally full, I closed the cap and debated whether or not to go inside for a drink. I was tired, and I wanted something to keep me awake for the rest of the drive. Against my better judgment, I decided to head for the store. As I started walking toward the entrance, I noticed the man had moved. He was no longer leaning against the ice machine. He was closer now, standing just a few feet away from the door. That's when I felt my stomach drop. He hadn't gone inside. He hadn't gotten in a car. He had just shifted positions to be right in the path of where I was headed. I slowed down immediately. My instincts were screaming at me that something wasn't right. I pretended to pat my pockets like I'd forgotten my wallet, turned around, and headed back toward my car. As I reached for the handle, I could see him again from the corner of my eye. He was still standing there, still watching me. I got into my car quickly and locked the doors. That's when he started walking toward me. It wasn't fast, but it was steady, and the whole time his eyes never left mine. I turned the ignition, my hands shaking. Before I could put the car in gear, he was right next to my window, knocking on the glass. I jumped out of my skin. His face was inches from mine now. I could see him clearly in the dim light. He looked to be in his mid-40s, scruffy beard, messy hair. But what disturbed me the most was the expression he had. He wasn't angry. He wasn't smiling. He just looked blank. He knocked again, harder this time, and then leaned in close. His breath fogged up the glass as he spoke. His voice was low, raspy, almost like he hadn't used it in days. He said, "You shouldn't be out here alone." My heart dropped into my stomach. I didn't respond, didn't roll down the window. I just shifted into drive and floored it out of there. I didn't stop until I got back on the highway. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely keep the wheel steady. For the rest of the drive home, I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting headlights to follow me. But no one did. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I just sat in the car for a while, trying to process what had happened. I kept hearing his voice in my head, those words he said, and the way he stared at me like he already knew me somehow. To this day, I have no idea what his intentions were. Maybe he was just trying to scare me. Maybe he was planning something worse. All I know is that if I had gone inside that store, if I hadn't listened to that gut feeling, things could have gone very differently. Now, whenever I'm on the road late at night, I make sure to fill up during the day. I don't stop at sketchy gas stations anymore. And whenever I see someone just standing there, staring, I get back in my car and leave. Because the truth is, you never really know what someone's capable of. This happened about 3 years ago, back when I was in my early 20s. At the time, I was working a late shift at a retail store. Most nights, I wouldn't get out until close to midnight. The store was located in a plaza with a huge open-air parking lot. During the day, it was always busy, but by the time I got off work, the place was practically deserted. Just a handful of cars scattered around the rows of parking spaces, most of them belonging to employees. I remember this one night in particular because it was one of those shifts that felt like it dragged on forever. It was a Thursday, and I clocked out around 11:30 p.m. By the time I left the store, most of my coworkers were already gone. Usually, I'd walk out with at least one other person, but that night it was just me. I stepped outside and felt that instant relief you get when you finally breathe fresh air after being indoors for hours. But almost immediately, I also felt this sense of unease. The lot was dimly lit, with a few flickering lights scattered across the area, and there was this heavy silence except for the occasional sound of crickets. I started making my way toward my car, which was parked farther back than usual. As I was walking, I noticed a figure standing 2 rows down. He was just standing there, not moving, not shifting his weight, nothing. At first, I assumed it was another late worker heading to their car. I didn't think much of it, but I couldn't shake the fact that he was facing my direction. I tried not to look obvious, so I kept my pace steady. But as I got closer to my car, I glanced over again. He was definitely staring at me. He wasn't pretending to be on his phone, or fumbling for keys, or doing anything normal, just standing still, facing me. I finally reached my car, unlocked it as quickly as I could, and got inside. As soon as I shut the door, I hit the lock button. That's when I looked up and realized the man was now walking toward me. At first, I thought maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe his car was parked in the same direction, and I was just being paranoid. But then I noticed something that confirmed it wasn't coincidence. His eyes were fixed directly on me. He wasn't even glancing around or looking for a car. His gaze didn't move off me once. He wasn't walking fast, but it was this steady, deliberate pace, like he wasn't in any rush. That made it so much worse. If someone's running at you, you panic and act fast. But the way he was calmly walking, like he knew he had all the time in the world, made my skin crawl. My heart was pounding as I put the keys in the ignition and turned on the engine. The headlights illuminated his face as he came into view. He was pale, with messy hair, and the most unsettling part was that he was smiling. Not a friendly smile, not even a fake one. It was this wide, almost forced grin that didn't match the situation at all. That was enough for me. I put the car in reverse and backed out of my spot quickly. But as I started to drive toward the exit, I noticed him suddenly break into a sprint. He was running directly at my car now. I floored it, heart racing out of my chest, and sped out of the parking lot. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station a couple miles down the road. I parked near the pumps and sat there for a while, trying to process what had just happened. My hands were shaking so bad I had to grip the steering wheel just to calm myself down. I debated calling the police, but what would I even say? A man was staring at me in a parking lot. They'd probably just dismiss it. So after a while, I went home. The next day at work, I mentioned it to one of my coworkers. His reaction made me feel even worse. He said, "Wait, you saw him too?" I asked what he meant, and he told me that over the past couple of weeks, a few employees had reported seeing a strange man in the lot late at night. Always alone, always just standing there watching people. Security had been called once, but by the time they showed up, he was gone. That made my stomach sink. It wasn't just in my head. I wasn't just being paranoid. This was a real person who had been lurking around, watching employees late at night. I worked at that store for another year after that, but I never parked in the back again. I always tried to leave with someone else, and if I had to walk out alone, I was on edge the entire time. To this day, I have no idea who that man was or what he wanted. But the way he stared at me, the way he started running when I tried to drive. Off, I can to shake the thought that if I hadn't been paying attention, if I hadn't gotten into my car fast enough, something much worse could have happened that night. This happened back when I was in college, during my sophomore year. I lived off campus in a small 3-bedroom apartment with 2 of my friends. It wasn't the nicest place. It was kind of old, with creaky floors and thin walls, but the rent was cheap and it was only a few blocks from campus. Most weekends, my roommates would head home to visit their families. I usually stayed behind because I worked a part-time job at a local diner. One particular weekend, both of my roommates were gone, and I had the whole apartment to myself. At first, I didn't mind. Having the place to myself was kind of nice. I could relax, catch up on homework, and not worry about anyone else's schedule. That Saturday night, I ordered some food, watched a movie in the living room, and by the time I checked the clock, it was close to midnight. I remember shutting everything off and heading to my room. The apartment was dead silent, except for the occasional sound of cars outside. I went through my usual routine, brushed my teeth, locked the front door, and double-checked the windows in the living room. Everything seemed normal. I got into bed and started scrolling through my phone for a while. Eventually, I set it down and turned off the lamp. That's when I heard this faint creaking sound from the hallway. At first, I froze, trying to figure out if I had imagined it. Our apartment was old, and sometimes the wood expanded or shifted at night. But then I heard it again. It wasn't just random creaking, it sounded like footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. I knew for a fact my roommates weren't home, and I hadn't invited anyone over. The front door was locked. I remembered checking it. So either I was losing my mind, or someone was actually in the apartment. I stayed completely still, listening. The sound stopped for a while, and I started to wonder if maybe I had imagined it after all. But then I heard something else. From my bedroom, I had a clear view of my closet door. And that's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The door was slightly open. I never, ever leave my closet door open. It is one of those habits I've had since I was a kid. I can fall asleep if it is cracked. I was sure I had closed it earlier. I just sat there staring at the dark gap between the door and the frame, my pulse pounding in my ears. And then I heard it. The faintest sound coming from inside the closet. Breathing. It wasn't mine. It was slow, heavy breathing. I felt paralyzed, like if I moved, whoever or whatever was in there would come out. After what felt like forever, I finally forced myself to move. I slid out of bed as quietly as possible, grabbed my phone, and tiptoed out of the room. Once I was in the hallway, I sprinted out the front door and down the stairs. I didn't stop until I was outside on the sidewalk, calling the police with shaking hands. When the cops arrived, they searched the apartment. At first, they didn't find anyone. I started to feel embarrassed, like maybe I had overreacted. But then one of the officers called me back inside. He pointed to the closet in my bedroom. There were muddy boot prints on the carpet prints that definitely hadn't been there earlier. They led from the window to the closet, and the window screen had been cut. The officer told me whoever it was had probably escaped through the window while I was outside waiting. The thought that someone had broken in and then hidden in my closet while I was in the room still makes me feel sick to my stomach. I can't just stop thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't noticed the door was open. If I had just gone to sleep like normal, that person would have been in the same room with me, standing only a few feet away, waiting. I moved out of that apartment as soon as my lease was up. Even now, years later, whenever I'm home alone, I check every closet and every lock before I can relax. And no matter what, I always keep my bedroom door locked at night. Because that night proves something to me. Sometimes the scariest things aren't ghosts or monsters. It's real people doing things you can't explain.